Welcome to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, a podcast about geek culture by lawyers with your hosts, Ben Siders and Kirk Taman.
And welcome back to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, the podcast that asks interesting questions that don't have any answers with your host, Ben Siders, that's me, and the other guy is, as always, Kirk Taman.
That's me, as in Captain of the Enterprise.
And Kirk is actually on the line. It's wonderful.
We're two of us talking to each other.
We are intellectual property lawyers and certified geeks practicing law in St. Louis, Missouri. You can find me, Ben, on Twitter at Benjamin Siders, and you can find Kirk at KirkDMN. You can follow this podcast on Twitter at LGGPod, and all of this information is coagulated on our website, www.lggpodcast.com. Well, as you already know, we're on the line together again. We're trying a new technology setup that will hopefully give us better sound quality, fewer interruptions. I guess we'll see when I go to edit this how well this comes across. But as with the last one, the sine wave looks good in Audacity, so hopefully this bears up.
And this is what, our third different technical solution to try to solve this here? I think we keep trying things.
By far our least convoluted, so hopefully that bears some fruit. So we obviously have had some scheduling and production delays. A lot of it's just due to general busyness. We've both been very slammed. I also got a COVID at right before Halloween, which knocked me out for about 2 weeks. So that didn't help. But then the holidays and regular things. I tried to record an episode while I had COVID to do like the COVID live episode. No, that was not possible. I couldn't get through 3 sentences without coughing. So it's weird though. Like when I tell people I've had COVID, everybody always wants to know what it was like. Like nobody asks you when you have the flu, oh, well, how was it? You're just like, oh, I'm just glad you're better. But for COVID, everybody wants the story. But there's not much to say other than I was very tired and I got all caught up on both my sleep and my Netflix backlog. All right,
There's nothing else.
By the way, have you watched The Queen's Gambit yet?
I'm not.
All right, you need to.
Is it Netflix or is it?
I think it's Netflix. I don't remember, honestly.
Netflix.
Oh, okay. Well, if you ever get a chance, you need to watch that. It was good. That's the only recommendation I'm gonna throw out here. So today's episode, we're going to try and return to our more conventional format where we talk about legal issues related to geek things. This is actually a topic that Kirk came up with when we were planning season 3, foolishly and pointlessly planning season 3 last January. Yeah, that wound up being a huge waste of time. But we wanted to do an episode on basically something to do with Baby Yoda, who at the time was a hot thing and probably still is, really. Although Kirk hasn't seen season 2 of The Mandalorian yet, so we'll be avoiding a lot of spoilers here. But the reason Baby Yoda is interesting, aside from the character aspects, is the knockoffs. Kirk, have you seen Baby Yoda knockoffs?
Yeah, they're impossible to avoid. I mean, you see them all over the place. I mean, originally when they first came out, and part of when we were deciding to do this episode, one of the big things in conjunction with Baby Yoda knockoffs is there wasn't really that much official stuff out yet.
There was. I couldn't tell what it was, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah. The other thing you bump into, and I think it's relevant, is the name Baby Yoda. In the course of doing this, it is called The Child. It is not called Baby Yoda, but obviously everybody calls it Baby Yoda.
It reminds me of that Mike Myers skit from Saturday Night Live. Baby Yoda, neither baby nor Yoda. Discuss.
Exactly. Although it technically could be Yoda, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess we don't really know that yet.
But, we got things that that was one of the things that was really interesting is that, it came out, I think The Mandalorian hit, and I think Baby Yoda was a much bigger hit than anybody expected.
Clearly, because they weren't ready, right? They didn't have the stuff ready to make that everybody wanted.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, kind of classic Star Wars, if I remember rightly. There was always the empty box for Christmas from the original, series sets. I know we talked about that on the show before, but, it's for classic Star Wars to, put the show out there and not have the toys ready.
If anybody should have learned this lesson by now, it's Lucasfilm.
You would think so, yes. He's done this before.
Yeah, although I guess George doesn't own it anymore, so maybe that's Disney. Although, again, when I think merchandising rights, Disney is like second after Star Wars, so you'd think they'd have this down. But at any event, Baby Yoda merch was the thing, and the knockoff showed up. And we actually did an episode kind of like this back, I think it was our 3rd or 4th episode. We did one on unauthorized like Minecraft stuff. Yeah. One of our more popular episodes in season 1, which I looked it up, by the way, that was 2017. Can you believe it's been 3 years? We've been doing this now.
Well, it's season 3, so I suppose, yes.
I know. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. So anyway, we haven't talked about this particular topic in a while, so we thought we would. If you're somehow not familiar with Baby Yoda, it comes from the Disney Plus TV series The Mandalorian, part of the Star Wars universe, starring Pedro Pascal as a Mandalorian bounty hunter, whose name I'm not sure they ever actually mentioned in the show, but I looked it up, and it's Din Djarin. Does that ring any bells?
I don't think they've ever said his name officially on it. He is just Mando or the Mandalorian.
Yeah, they call him Mando. Yeah. So the show's been well received. It's we've talked about it. It's not flawless, but I think it's done a really nice job of expanding the Star Wars universe in an interesting way that does not over-explain. Like we haven't had a midichlorian moment yet in the Mandalorian.
But it's interesting because we were talking about this beforehand. Part of the reason I have not seen season 2 of The Mandalorian, I've been wanting to watch it, but my kids don't want me to watch it until they're caught up.
Yeah.
They've decided they want to watch The Mandalorian. And so we have actually started rewatching season 1, 3 episodes into season 1. And the comment that I made with it, I mean, I remember watching it and sort of us, picking it apart a little bit on this show when it first came out. Watching it again, it's a surprisingly good show. It's really kind of amazing how well done it is. And again, like there were things with it where, now that I know that the endpoints and stuff you can talk about, it's, there's things that I could point out to the kids, like notice what is chasing him. It's a battle droid. It really is a surprisingly good show. And actually what really stunned me is it's surprisingly well acted.
I was very, so we kind of watched the first episode as well. Charlie wanted to watch the new episode, but the other kids weren't available. So I said, okay, he didn't watch the first season at all. So I remember being, intrigued, but underwhelmed by it when I first watched it and kind of nitpicking and finding a lot of flaws. But as I rewatched it, I had the same experience you did. It really holds up really well to multiple viewings. So and I think that's a testament to both the attention to detail in a good way. Not that the films didn't have attention to detail, but the sequel trilogy did not really seem to embrace the expanded and extended universe and sort of the fan lore the same way that The Mandalorian does. The Mandalorian feels like a professional movie made by fans of Star Wars as opposed to just a studio product.
Yeah, I think that I do sort of agree with you. I think it's one of those where it has a bit of labor love feel to it. And just, small details. Like one of the things we really noted in episode 1 of season 1 is, when you see the stormtroopers for the first time, they're kind of beat up. Their armor's kind of beat up. It's clearly showing that they're old. The other thing with it is, and something I hadn't noted at the time, but I definitely noted now, none of them have the right blasters. They're using all sorts of weird weapons, most of which are essentially pistols or handguns.
So they're probably scavenging gear at this point.
Yeah. And it's one of those, that's a tiny little detail. It's one of those things. But when you saw it again, I'm like, yeah, these guys look ad hoc. It looks like they're, not really doing, they're not really stormtroopers. Mm-hmm. And even the way they behave, they don't seem to really behave like stormtroopers. And I'm like, they don't say anything about it. They never make a point out of that. But it feels that way. And that's a really nice fan moment for it.
So this is all to say, we're going to probably get into spoilers for season 1, episode 1. I mean, this episode's called Baby Yoda. So we've already spoiled one thing. But it's the first...
we can't avoid spoiling episode 1.
If you're somehow unaware of it, you're listening to the wrong podcast. So we'll assume everybody has at least seen season 1. If you have not... there's not a lot that really happens from a plot perspective, but we may get into some of those things as we discuss this. And we're going to avoid talking about season 2 at all because Kirk has not seen it. And I'm impatiently waiting for him to get caught up. I have thoughts and I need to share them with somebody. So let's talk about Baby Yoda merch. Fundamentally, Kirk, what would you say is the number one problem that these knockoffs are going to have with trying to produce Baby Yoda merch?
I think one is it's going to be a violation of copyright.
Yeah, right. We're in character copyright clearly, but so let's go back to our character copyright. Let's back up. So copyright, in case you haven't listened to one of us talk about this in a while, what is copyright about? It's about copying, right? It's really about taking somebody else's original work and reproducing it and distributing it or displaying it to the public in some way. So obviously, a Baby Yoda merch is infringing the copyright in the appearance of the Baby Yoda character, but the character copy, other than the appearance though, could you do other things with the character? And this is something we talked about in our 3-part series from our first season. With visual characters, it's a little easier to say, well, you obviously taken the way that it looks, but what if you were to write a piece of fan fiction or something like that instead that does not show the visual depiction, but just refers to the child? Is that character sufficiently defined to merit copyright protection as a character? That's a tough call when you have a character that doesn't talk, doesn't really move, doesn't say anything, doesn't have a name, doesn't have a personality. It just looks like somebody we know.
And that's the one thing about it is the fact that we're using the term Baby Yoda. Officially, the name is the child, and we can't say that you own a trademark or a copyright in simply a character named the child.
Exactly,
it's too generic of a name, and so you really get into those kind of questions with it. Is how sufficiently delineated is this character? And the interesting thing from a legal perspective of where this comes from in character copyright, basically they've said characters have to be sufficiently delineated in order to be available for copyright protection. The issue you get into is, what does it mean to be sufficiently delineated to be a character? And if you look through the case history in this, visual characters get more protection than characters that don't have any visual depiction.
Which makes some intuitive sense, right? Like if you're going to draw Superman in a comic book, well, now I know what he looks like. And so if somebody else draws a character that looks similar, then okay, well, then you've infringed a visual work of art. But it's a lot trickier when you have either characters only defined narratively in prose, or if, or the question of what that I just proposed, where you have a visually defined character, but you reference that character in a non-visual medium. I think that's a lot harder. And that's where we see courts really struggling to figure out how to deal with it and kind of falling back on trademark type analysis, even though they're looking at copyright.
And this is a relevant question right now. There's actually discussion. There's some case law and some legislation that's bouncing around having to do with what is the standard for this sufficiently delineated, and should we get rid of it? And I mean, there's been some questions about that. I think for the most part, the industry is pushing back and saying, no, you really do need these sufficiently delineated characters to be entitled to character copyright. We shouldn't just allow anything to get copyright. The concern here and what it bumps into, and again, sort of if you jump into the case law, one of the major cases on sufficiently delineated had to do with a draft script. And it was the draft script for a bunch of ex-Vietnam veterans who drove around in a van and saved people. You probably guess I'm talking about the A-Team, but the script was not for the A-Team. The script was proposed to be the sort of general idea. They laid out the basics of what the characters were, what their personalities were. And when you read through the description, it sounds a lot like the characters from the A-Team. The studio ended up making the A-Team, did not buy the script from the individual scriptwriter. That resulted in the lawsuit about this. And I can't remember what his original script was called. It had a different name.
It was Cargo.
Cargo, that's it, yeah. And the issue with it is how were the characters sufficiently defined in this, this basic script treatment with it, where they didn't necessarily have names, but they had basic personalities, and the determination was no, these are not sufficiently defined to what it is in order to constitute a copyright infringement.
There are archetypes, right? That was the analysis. Yeah. Is it a character, or is it just an archetype? Like, is it a mad scientist, or is it Dr. Jekyll?
Yeah, and those types of things as to what you got into from it. They said they're not sufficiently defined in order to constitute character copyright. And one of the things I got into is it's where does stuff become sufficiently defined? And I found this to be a very interesting question. And when I did, and we've talked about it previously, I did a major research paper into universe and character copyrights and stuff like that. And one of the questions I bumped into is how much does the character need a name? How much do you bump into the fact that the character needs a name to really be sufficiently delineated, and that name needs to be copied? It's one thing to say, mystical futuristic knight. It's another thing to say Luke Skywalker. And that's one of the issues with Baby Yoda.
Yeah.
Baby Yoda doesn't have a name.
And really, what is it a specific character or an archetype? I mean, at this point, Star Wars has been part of the zeitgeist since 1977, our entire lives, multiple generations. Isn't mystical space wizard just an archetype now?
Yeah, and you sort of bump into that, kind of things. And there's obviously mystical space wizard is out there that is not a Jedi Knight. We have science fiction knights. We have the idea that, this idea of, in some sense, using archaic weapons in the far future. The number of swords that exist for characters in the far future is a thing. And it's a Warhammer 40,000 background behind me. One of the running jokes in conjunction with Warhammer 40,000 is that the tank commanders are always carrying swords. Now, there's obviously cavalry reference to that, the sort of, existing World War II piece to it. But you can buy t-shirts and they're running jokes that show sort of the guy sitting on the top of a tank holding a sword. The running comment is drive closer so I can hit them with my sword. And you kind of look at it and you're like, the guy's in a tank. Like, why are you have a sword? What good does the sword do hanging out? It's
ceremonial in that sense. Whereas with the Jedis, it's like, it's a definition of their religion, their ethos, all that kind of stuff, ethos, I guess. So yeah, there's a fundamental question there as to whether Baby Yoda is sufficiently delineated to, I mean, as a visual depiction, clearly it is. Plus, it also looks like regular Yoda. So, you know, there's that too. I guess another question is, if we find out that it is Yoda, now is the protection different because Yoda is such a well-established character? And that seems strange to me, that the level of copyright protection of the character depends upon whether they later tell us it is Yoda or not, or a clone of Yoda. Is this something we want courts and juries to be doing in copyright infringement cases? Is doing what we do, try to predict what's going to happen in these shows? or you know, another thing, if you have a suit filed over copyright infringement, and one of the issues is the character is not sufficiently distinct, okay, well then in the next episode, now it is Yoda. There, solved. I mean, this doesn't seems to me like this is not how the law should work.
Yeah, and definitely the one concern with it is it being potentially retroactive, of the idea that, you know, as of right now, we don't know. You know, if it is Yoda and they said, you know, 2 episodes from now, it is Yoda, well, we don't know now. So, you know, how can we now say it's entitled to character copyright at this instant because it's Yoda, even though nobody knows it's Yoda?
Yeah. And likewise, if it winds up being a clone of Yoda, okay, well, now we're actually getting into like the meta of the show. Like, would a jury have to figure out, or a judge, well, if it's a clone of a character that is sufficiently delineated, does the clone also get copyright protection? I mean, it's a clone. And then you get into like the Thrawn trilogy, where you'd say, well, in the Thrawn trilogy, the clones are not the same character, especially if they're force sensitive. And now maybe is that canon or not becomes relevant to a copyright infringement question.
Yeah, you're going to get into all sorts of sort of, you know, weird issues. And
it's
again,
weird.
You don't want courts looking into the idea of what's the meta of a universe that's fictional to determine what the legal standing of it is.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, in this case, I think they'd have an easy out of saying, well, look, it's if you write something if you do a visual depiction, it's clear copyright infringement. If you write something up that references the character, it's probably a tougher case. But the market for that type of product is probably very limited. Baby Yoda is popular because it's adorable. And so doing something in text is probably not going to produce any real damages, you know, or anything like that. So other than a potential trademark type interest where you have to enforce to maintain the rights, you know, the hypothetical I've proposed is sort of a law school final nightmare type question that one has no answer, and two is unlikely to ever come up in practice, because realistically, what are the losses? There aren't any.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you bump into is, you know, because Baby Yoda does look like Yoda as another established character, Star Wars is enough established that I think you're starting to get looks of characters, and essentially, to say, for lack of a better term, the races of characters in the Star Wars universe are starting to become accepted as Star Wars characters, not just archetypes. So again, you know, we have R series droids. Like, everybody recognizes what an R series droid looks like. They're different colors, there's slight variations on them, but they are what they are. And again, we were at Disney World just before this began. We went to the droid factory in Galaxy's Edge. You build a BB series droid or you build an R series droid. One of my kids each built one of each one. And, you know, you recognize R series droids are R series droids, even though there's a huge number of different ways you can put the parts together. Mm-hmm. They all look similar. And I think we're seeing a lot of that, quite frankly, in the Star Wars universe right now. They're expanding it in a bunch of ways. Again, the other thing we've been watching is Clone Wars on and off. You know, in Clone Wars, Twi'leks become a serious character. Like, you actually really get that Twi'leks are part of the universe and what they are and who they are and what they look like. You know, I think that you're starting to see that in some of this, and when we talk about Star Wars and we talk about Baby Yoda, we are talking about a franchise that has potentially character copyright beyond individual characters, just because there's so much storytelling behind certain races and certain characters.
Yeah, the look and feel of the Star Wars universe, sort of the tone, the color palette, the way that things are designed. I could probably give you, you know, a piece of concept art that you've never seen before, and you could probably tell me with about a 75% accuracy rate whether this was drawn for, you know, a never produced Star Wars show or movie or something or not.
Now, again, that's not to say that you're going to be entitled to character copyright to, you know, a race you introduce in Star Wars. But it's something where for certain of these established ones, particularly if there's a major character that is an alien depiction, you're probably going to get some association with it. And again, I mean, I can even jump back. You know, you go to something like, you know, Babylon 5, a lizard man is not going to be something you can necessarily say you have protection in. But obviously Babylon 5 had races, you know, a race that effectively was lizard men. But you can look at it and kind of say, hey, that's a well enough defined race that you don't necessarily have to copy the individual character to still potentially bump into a character copyright. I think we got to put that into the Baby Yoda piece. So the fact that Yoda was a very well-defined defined character, a very unique character when he came out. I mean, there really is nothing else that looked like Yoda at the point in time he came out. That distinct look carrying into Baby Yoda is potentially going to grant it more protection than if Baby Yoda had been its own thing, if he just simply created, an entirely new race for it. But yeah, I think you've got you've got a lot of stuff sort of associated with that. Again, it'll be interesting to see what it is. But yeah, sort of going to the thing with it, I think we can look at it and say, most of the people making knockoff products want the visual depiction. The whole point, Baby Yoda is adorable. And that's really the whole idea. Now, part of it is he behaves like a baby and has kind of weird baby type things. So the example, the one I pick on is that, in episode 2, him eating the frog. It's one of those sort of hilarious moments because it's not what you expect. You don't expect a baby to swallow a frog whole.
It defines the character a little bit. It starts to give you little inklings of his personality and what he does and things like that. And I think it's also important to point out that even for characters that are not well delineated, you do still have, in a movie at least, a character design element. Like a Salacious Crumb, the little creature that sits by Jabba, doesn't really have a personality other than he laughs at everything. But you still have a visual design for it. And that's probably what distinguishes these the most from some of the prior cases we've seen involving characters like Sherlock Holmes and characters like that, which, the visual depictions came after the initial narrative definition. Star Wars obviously doesn't have that problem, but you still get into these fan fiction issues, which is something that our listeners in particular have always been interested in. If I want to write fan fiction, what can I do? And we've talked about this in prior episodes, and there's just really no good answer other than, to the extent that these content owners like Paramount and Lucasfilms will publish, what do you call them? Like guidelines or fan fiction kits. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. Their concern is probably, I would guess, more in the trademark realm, because if you don't enforce your trademarks, you lose them at some point. But I don't know how it's going to apply here. It's almost like a trade dress type argument, which we kind of covered in our very first episode about the Rogue One trailer. Does it look or feel like Star Wars?
Yeah, I think you really get some interesting stuff. I think Salacious Crumb is a great example, actually, because you're talking about a character that only appeared in Return of the Jedi. He's appeared in none of the other movies, as far as I know, and is not really a character in many respects. I mean, he's a pet. Race appears in Mandalorian. Everybody knows exactly what it is. It's hilarious because of the way he's portrayed. They're being eaten. They're essentially a food product. But this is a character with very little depiction. And again, it's clearly not the same character. Salacious Crumb is presumably died.
Blew up on the sail barge.
So, we have to assume that it's not the same character, existing here. Again, it's something of the same kind of race. What do you do with this? Where are the standards for it? Talking about the idea of them putting out, fan fiction guidelines, and stuff like that. I think a lot of it, quite frankly, is they realize fans are going to want to do this. And so they try to put out, here's what we're okay with. We are okay with this. But we also want to make sure that we can sort of license the property in certain official ways that maintain the value for both them and for the licensee.
Yeah, and this is where we often said in prior episodes, follow the money. And we don't mean that in a cynical way, although the cynical way is also true. Copyright infringement takes place on a broad scale basis every day. I don't know for sure, but I very much doubt that all these animated GIFs that people post as memes, I'm skeptical that any of these platforms that are distributing this, and I know none of the users, have gotten permission from NBC to use that clip or from Steve Carell to use his likeness. But this happens, again, there's probably millions of these posted a day for countless different properties. Nothing's done about it because what's the point? What are the damages that you're going to get out of it? But this leads to a common misconception that, well, if I'm not making money off of it, then it's not copyright infringement, which you and I both know is not true. It still may be.
It's hard to figure out what's official. It's hard to figure out what's unofficial. I do think that's part of the reason why you also have sort of official releases by studios and official licensing sort of pieces. And that's, I think, what you really get into with a lot of these things. And again, this idea of knockoffs, one of the real concerns you bump into in conjunction with knockoffs is quality. And the example, like one of the ones I remember, just sort of getting back to the idea of what's original. And for those of you who maybe, younger in this, you don't remember this, but obviously when I was in high school, one of the important things was wearing Hard Rock Cafe t-shirts. That was a huge deal. And, you could go and you could get them at Hard Rock Cafes and stuff like that. You also had an enormous number of knockoffs because they were very simple, and there's actually some question around exactly what the trademark and copyright rights were in those. But one of the things you noted is the ones that were, you bought from a street vendor at a table, a block away from the Hard Rock Cafe, were both substantially cheaper, but they were oftentimes not as good a quality. And a lot of times what they also did is they weren't entirely accurate. Ben just popped up a joke here in conjunction with Star Wars Hard Rock Cafe shirts for Mos Eisley Cantina.
Yeah, so Kirk just made me think of this. I've seen this shirt before, which is a Hard Rock Cafe style of shirt. But instead of Hard Rock Cafe, it says Mos Eisley Cantina and then Tatooine on the bottom, as though Mos Eisley is like a a chain of taverns that don't like droids.
Yeah.
I guess not so much recently. Here's another example. So is this parody? Is this satire? Would this be protected? I mean, this obviously, I don't want to say obviously, but I would argue there's not a strong trademark infringement argument here, although they're taking the same. I'll see if we can find a copy of this to tweet out too, so you guys can see what we're looking at. But it's the same style. But is anybody going to be confused about whether whoever made this T-shirt is actually associated with the Hard Rock Cafe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great joke. Even the fact that they changed the sort of stereotypical like brown or yellow, whatever color you want to call it, circle. In the background, and they basically made the sun setting over
the Jabba's palace. It looks like, yeah,
in the sun's setting, I should say. Over it's one of those things where it's clearly a riff off of it, but you got to and for purposes of trademark infringement, you look at it and say, is it playing off of the trademark's success? And it does appear to be doing that. At the same time, it's clearly not authorized as Hard Rock Cafe.
Well, and then when you blend two things like that, so there's two questions. So the Mos Eisley one, for example, so Hard Rock Cafe probably doesn't have a really strong claim here, although it's not crazy to say that the market for this this shirt design is based on its similarity to Hard Rock and that it's trading off the popularity of Hard Rock Cafe. What about the other side, though? Doesn't Lucasfilm have an argument? No. People want it because it says Mos Eisley Cantina Tatooine. That's our stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And it does have a silhouette of Jabba's palace. And I don't know if that's exactly what it looks like, but the twin suns, the palace, that is vaguely at least reminiscent of actual, scenes in the film. So they may have more than it may pass the laugh test, let's say. When you blend things like this, you get into a whole separate set of issues where you're inviting the attention of two different, probably very large content holders who both want you to stop.
Yeah. Or you potentially look at it and they both think it's funny and it's not close enough to either one of them to actually have an issue with it. And obviously you see a lot of this. I mean, it's one of these things, and it's not necessarily was the point of this episode, but this is an interesting sort of thing to get into, is the idea of blending multiple people's intellectual property together in a way which creates something entirely new. So again, we kind of look at this and we say, hey, you're blending these two pieces of intellectual property together. It creates something entirely new, but it is a riff off of both of them. And what does that mean? Where do you draw the line in conjunction with these things? And this is difficult. I mean, there's no question this is difficult. Now we're getting more into trademark law here. Yep. There are also a lot of other, famous properties they've done this with. I think there's a little question that has been played off of Game of Thrones. And that's one of those things we kind of do need to get into in conjunction with Baby Yoda, because in some sense, we're talking about Baby Yoda itself being a blending of IP, between new from the blend from what was in Empire Strikes Back.
Actually, the Game of Thrones comment is a good one, because have you ever seen any of the shows, any of the episodes?
Yeah, I've seen the entirety of season 1.
Okay, so you're familiar with the very notable introduction, though, where like the gears turn and the cities all kind of pop up out of the ground, and that idea of having everything kind of pop up and grow in real time. The Big Ten or I guess it's the Big Ten Conference generally borrowed, let's say, from this for a little 30-second commercial spot that they run incessantly during all of the Hawkeye games that I watch. But it does the same thing. It starts with the Rose Bowl in California, and then it goes through Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa, and starts moving east across the country and popping up little Game of Thrones type models of like iconic either buildings or references to each school. It was pretty neat at first, although after 5 years of seeing it, I'm kind of tired of it. Is there a cop or is there a there's no copyright interest. Again, idea expression dichotomy. The idea is not protected. The particular expression is. But could they argue that over the number of seasons that they had, that they've established some sort of trademark right in that concept that would be broader?
Yeah, and that's I think you really get into this is difficult. And I think that's
very difficult
to be telling people about this is, we are getting into areas right now that we really can't answer. I mean, we joke about the fact that, this shows asks interesting questions with no answers. This is one that really has no answer, of where is the line here. None of these are clear on either side.
And we've speculated that one of the reasons there are no answers is, well, there's two main reasons, I think. One is that a lot of these issues are relatively new, of recent vintage. And also, in the handful of cases where there's actually enough money at stake and you got somebody on the defendant side that wants to fight about it, they settle. We had the Axonar case settled. These cases don't go all the way through to a judgment or an appellate decision, which would give us some actual law about it. They tend to settle. And we've kind of speculated that maybe it's because nobody really wants an answer, that people are sort of happy with the vague and ambiguous detente that's been struck at this point, where they'll let you know if you've overstepped a line, and then things just kind of get resolved privately.
I think that's a lot of the things to keep in mind with this. And again, I think quite frankly, turning to our basic topic of the idea of, Baby Yoda, quite frankly, I think that's a lot of what we're going to see here and what we've seen here is, Disney looking at it and saying, we don't necessarily going to stop all the uses of Baby Yoda, but we are going to stop some. And what are we going to stop and what are we not going to stop? And
particularly the commercial ones, right? It's people who are selling things are going to be the number one target, because they're making money trading off of something that they didn't come up with.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, they want to make products like that. They want to be able to put those out there. They've got to be paying attention to, unofficial products that are related to that. But again, where do they draw that line? Where do they say, hey, this is a product we want to do, a product we don't want to do? And maybe that's sort of the real takeaway of this episode, is when you get into these issues of knockoff products that people just simply want products.
And that's the fundamental question here is what can people not named Disney or Lucasfilm do with this? And it's interesting, especially when you consider that the people buying the knockoffs, for the most part, probably don't know or don't care. It's not like it's a Louis Vuitton bag or something where the brand name is important. No one cares whether it's licensed or not. Usually, people like us, nerds who place a premium on that kind of thing, we might, plus we're lawyers, so we might at least notice whether we care or not. But I think your average consumer just sees the thing and they want it, and they don't really care where it came from. They care about what it costs and how fast it can get to them. And I've got a hard stop here coming up in about 5 minutes, so we're going to wrap up. Kirk, any closing thoughts?
I think the real thing with this is, and again, what the real takeaway from this is, we got into some really complicated issues with this and figuring out, and it's a really complicated issue partially because of the fact that we're dealing with rights that are a bit amorphous. And when you look at how those rights get attached, we have a character in Baby Yoda that's different from most other characters. He's popular because he's adorable. He's not popular because he's necessarily Yoda's baby, or anything else. How do we deal with this under character copyright? That really is the idea of it being an individual and having a personality and stuff like that. That's kind of the standard for what it is, efficiently delineated, with a character that is only delineated by being cute.
So we'll wrap that up. This would be probably our second to last Edamame episode. I think we're going to do some sort of, we've usually done a holiday special, which has generally been some kind of Star Wars themed
maybe the new holiday special, the new Lego holiday special is what we
Yes,
do.
We can talk about that one, which had all kinds of references to the original Star Wars holiday special. So we'll do something else with Star Wars, which is our favorite topic for our holiday special. And that'll probably put a bow on 2020. Good riddance. And we'll hopefully have we'll start season 4 in 2021, and I think we want to return to our longer format. I thought this technology setup worked out better than what we tried before, so maybe we'll keep doing this and see if that works until we can get back together. So anyway, check out our website, lggpodcast.com. It has links to our various platforms where you can download prior episodes, and you can get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, and by email. Subscribe to this podcast on the platforms and give us a review to help new listeners find us. You can find me on Twitter at Benjamin Siders, and you can find Kirk at KirkDMN. That's all for today. We'll see you next time. Lorem, play us out.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by Lewis Rice LLC, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. This podcast was produced and recorded in St. Louis, Missouri.
They want to see it. So we're rewatching season 1.
It's way better than I remembered.
Yeah, it is actually. I've been stunned at that. It's like, we watched the first 3 episodes and my wife's like, this is actually really good.
All right. So I'll kick us off here, and then we'll go.